What's going on, my fellow Jedi and Padawans? Welcome back to another Jedi gaming video. Thank you guys so much for coming back to the channel. If you guys are new, welcome. Now we all know that this season of the Deep Arc is very highlighted and is being used everywhere inside of PvE, especially with this artifact that we have, juicing all of these S-tier builds up to 12 out of 10, absolutely annihilating everything in your path. Now, with this Warlock build here, we are utilizing the exotic chess piece, the Mantle of Battle Harmony, which gives us super energy on elemental weapon takedowns that match our subclass. So we are getting our subclass with that arc and our Kamehameha super back very quickly, within 45 to a minute, depending on the ad density inside of that room. And we are also utilizing a new exotic from this season with the Centrifuge, which is basically the Halo Supercell from D1. Now, for this build, we can see here, I personally am using Chaos Reach. I really enjoy this for the PvE realm more than Storm Trance, unless I'm using like Crown of Tempest. Really the only exotic that I pair with Storm Trance in my opinion. So this, with the jolting and the damage it can output, just feels way better. Now, for me, I'm using Healing Rift with Burst Glide. Totally up to you. I would rather go with the Healing Rift for that survivability, but Jump is totally up to you. Now, for me, I'm using Chain Lightning because this gives us the jolting of enemies, and you will see we're using that with aspects and fragments that we have on. While we are amplified, it creates an additional set of chains, which is also important for this build because we are going to be amplified consistently, especially since we're using that nice exotic arc weapon. Now, of course, we're using the Pulse Grenade because it's insane in PvE, and with our Warlock, definitely one of the best because of its ability to create ionic traces for us, and with our aspects and fragments, you will see why again. First aspect that we got going on is the Arc Soul. Casting our Rift creates Arc Souls that fires at the targets in front of us. Allies that pass through also get these Arc Souls. While we're amplified, they become supercharged and gain increased fire rate. Very nice because these count as ability defeats and arc defeats, so it feeds into other things that we have in this build just with those little Arc Souls, and we're gonna have our Rift up very consistently with this build as well. Now, one of the reasons that pairs well is the second aspect in Electrostatic Mind. With defeating targets with arc abilities or jolted or blinded targets creates ionic traces for us. Collecting those ionic traces make us amplified, plus ionic traces give us our abilities, so we're able to chain our melee as well as our grenade. And with our arc weapon, we're going to be able to blind enemies easily because of its exotic perk, plus all of those arc souls. So we are creating ionic traces everywhere, allowing for ability spam, which allow even faster super regen, like I said, about 45 seconds, if not faster, when you are wiping out enemies. So very good to have your super back consistently with this build. Now, onto our fragments, laying heavily into those ionic traces. Spark of Ions. Defeating a jolted target creates ionic traces. We are jolting targets with our Chain Lightning melee, as well as we will with our grenade as well because of our other fragments that we have on. Next on the list, making our Pulse Grenade even better, Spark of Magnitude, which gives that Pulse Grenade an extended duration. Number 3, feeding back into our ability spam with all of those ionic traces. Spark of Recharge. When we're critically wounded, our melee and grenade energy regen more quickly. So when we do play that endgame content and we do happen to have our shield break and get that critically wounded, we're going to have that ability spam even more than normal. And last but not least, which connects our grenade with our aspects, we have that Spark of Shock. So our arc grenades are going to jolt targets, which are going to give us that amplification with the ionic traces being created and that Electrostatic Mind being procced for even more of those ionic traces. So everything's going to be jolted, ionic traces going to be flowing, we're going to blind targets with our weapon, as you'll see in a second here. So this build, absolutely nasty, and we're getting Chaos Reach in like 30 to 45 seconds. Now, moving on to the weapons inside of this build, being able to deal with every single type of champion, we have Riptide first with stats for all chill clip, so we can slow and freeze those targets for overload and unstoppable champions. Now, I am using the new Centrifuge, like I said, with that static build-up and regenerative motion. We're going to be able to overcharge the weapon when we are amplified, and we're going to be able to reload as we run around, slide, everything like that. So it is very nice for continuously firing the weapon, and it'll get nice little explosions for us on those arc defeats when it is fully charged, which blinds targets, which again we can use inside of stunning a champion with unstoppables right here. And last but not least, we got that Hothead Adept with tracking explosive light. I personally like it because a lot of enemies seem to be moving around, and explosive light, we're creating orbs of power everywhere with this build, so we get that nice juicy damage increase because of that explosive light and picking up those orbs. Now, on to our artifact, which is absolutely nasty for these arc builds. Like I said, taking this S-tier build and cranking it up to 12. We have anti-barrier pulse for that centrifuge with that artified mods for arc as well as melee. Now, we have the staple down here in these 5 with electric armor, having that amplification stay longer, so everything in our subclass that uses amplification in our aspects and fragments, creating our arc souls to be more efficient with that faster shots, and everything is going to last even longer. On top of that, we're going to gain a stacks of armor charge when we stun champions inside of that endgame. Like I said, our weapon's very easy to get this to proc. Next, we got that Thunderous Retort, so while we are amplified, our Chaos Reach is going to do more damage, or when we are critically wounded, and with this build, amplification is flowing so easy with those Ionic Traces, getting arc defeats, arc souls, it basically never leaves, so Thunderous Retort is always procced, and we can use our super every 45 seconds. On top of that, we have amped up, gain damage resistant while amplified, so that end game is just that much easier with this amped up there for staying alive. And then we have lightning strikes twice. After throwing an arc grenade, we gain that energy charge even faster, so allowing for more jolting of targets with that pulse grenade spam and creating even more of those Ionic Traces. And last but certainly not least, shock and awe, arc final blows while amplified, summon a burst of lightning that damages and jolts targets. Another way for even more Ionic Traces to be created for us, since we're using those arc final blows in our arc souls, our melee, our grenade, as well as our weapons. Now, for armor and mods over here, definitely try to go with resilience, recovery, and discipline as your 3 that you're stacking out. Intellect with this chest piece kind of doesn't matter in my opinion. We're getting it back very quickly. If you can keep it at about 50, that is ideal. Now, when we move on to our head and our mods, we're going to be using Dynamo, Hands-On, and Arc Siphon. So, Dynamo, we're going to reduce our super cooldown even more, and you will see when we throw down that rift, it is a nice little chunk of energy. We're also using Hands-On, so when we get defeats with our melee, with that extra little bit of chaining that we're getting from amplification, we're also going to get super energy. So like I said, with that defeating of enemies consistently with our weapons, as well as throwing down our rift and melees, 35 to 40 seconds with that, getting it back super fast, and then orbs of power flowing from our arc weapon defeats. Now, onto our arms right here, we got firepower, momentum transfer, and bolstering detonation. So those grenades are going to give us orbs of power on defeats, also giving us back melee energy as well as class ability energy when we cause damage with those grenades. So playing back into our headpiece mods with Dynamo and Hands-On, being able to spam our abilities, giving us our super energy back even faster than before. Now, onto this chest piece that did get updated with this season as well, the Mantle of Battle Harmony. Takedowns with weapons that have damage type matching your subclass grant us super energy. Well, our super energy is full, you gain a temporary bonus weapon damage of the matching same subclass element, so those arc weapons are going to get a bonus to ×4, which is about 25% increase on damage, and it doesn't stack with search mods on our legs, even though we will use them them, and I'll explain why. But we do have mods here to back that up as well, because most of the time we're not going to have it full. As soon as we pop it, we're going to use it for the most part, so it isn't really mattering with that conjecture and not stacking of the mods on our boots, as well as the damage stacking of the absorption shell. Now, we do have a charged up as well as emergency reinforcement to help us stay alive with that armor charge. We have that reduced damage reduction and being able to hold more stacks of that armor charge, which we're getting from those orbs of power, as well as stunning those champions inside of that endgame activity. Now, moving on to our boots, we are using 2 of the arc weapon surges because, like I said, most of the time we're not going to have that full super, and when we do, it's going to take over the damage of these anyways, especially since we only have 2. But we're using these so we can get those defeats a little bit faster before that super is fully charged, which will give us the super even faster. So this helps a lot in my personal opinion. Plus, this takes over after you use your super with that DPS phase. You can throw your super out and then these will take over, so that rocket can still do a nice little bit of extra damage. Now, on top of that, we do have Absolution, so when we pick up Orbs of Power, all of our ability cooldown is going to be reduced, allowing us for that ability spam once again. And last but not least, on our class item right here, Powerful Attraction, definitely a staple this season. Automatically collect Orbs of Power when we activate our class ability. We're going to have that up constantly, so we're going to get all of those orbs very, very fast by just throwing down our Rift, using Time Dilation to help with that arc weapon surge before we have the Mantle of Battle Harmony take over when our super is full, allowing us to have that nice juicy damage on our Centrifuge as well as our Hothead, and then a Bomber, so when we do throw down our Rift, we're going to get that grenade back a little bit faster, allowing us to continuously spam it and jolt targets, creating ionic traces, allowing us to have that nice perpetual feedback loop on the arms kick in, where we get our class ability and our melee back when we do grenade damage, and then throwing that down to get our Rift, which heals us, amplifies us with those Arc Souls, giving us even more ionic traces, and then backing it up, absolutely just getting chunks on chunks of super energy with getting those defeats with Centrifuge, which is a super fun weapon in my personal opinion when it's overcharged and has that catalyst proc. Since we have this build with amplification being on at all times, the overcharge basically doesn't go away, so we have jolting and blinding basically just from that gun when we get those defeats, allowing us to stun champions and proc even more of our artifact mods as well as our aspects and fragments. So pairs very well with that arc synergy. Absolutely one of the best. You could use Risk Run or something like that. Trinity Ghoul also would be a fantastic option with this build because of all of that chaining of the lightning, and the arc synergy of all 3 of those weapons is off the chart in my personal opinion. So hopefully y'all like this build, this Arc Warlock. Definitely be highlighting that Arc Void and Strand this season. No, I've been pretty heavy on the Arc, but it has been so much fun with these changes of the sandbox and some of the exotics that we got, highlighting Arc for sure, but definitely got a lot more builds coming out for each of our classes in the Void and Strand type as well. So be on the lookout for those. Hit that notification bell, subscribe so you don't miss out on any of those. Got some weapon guides coming out once I finish my red borders and level them up, so very excited for those as well. Been a very fun season going into the ocean and swimming around. So thank you guys again for that support. Truly appreciate it. I will catch all y'all in the next one. Peace.